This is Samantha Koenig, and shrouded in the darkness of one of Alaska's cold winter nights, she suddenly and mysteriously disappeared. The news terrified her family, and what followed was a prompt investigation conducted by local police and the FBI in a desperate bid to track down the missing teenager. However, sadly, efforts initially came back fruitless. That would be until approximately 3 weeks later, when, suddenly, her family received a photo. It was a picture of their daughter seemingly alive and well, and she was holding an issue of a recent newspaper to prove it. With this clue now in their possession, detectives knew that it was now a race against the clock to track down her kidnapper. However, little did they know just how dangerous the assailant was. In fact, this wasn't just a random abduction, but a meticulously planned attack, and one that spanned far past Samantha. Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at a case that sent shockwaves throughout the United States. In fact, you may even know this story already. Now, on the surface, our assailant appeared to be the ordinary family man. However, very little did any of his family or friends know the terrible and dark secrets he was hiding. By the way, I post true crime, strange and chilling stories here up to twice a week. So, if you're not going to buy a coffee, then please at least consider subscribing. Thank you. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee and let's caffeinate while we investigate. This is the case of Samantha Koenig. Howdy folks, and welcome to America's most northern state. Of course, that being Alaska. With its majestic mountains, pristine glaciers, and abundant wildlife, Alaska's stunning landscapes and features make it one of Earth's most beautiful and awe-inspiring places. Today, we're focusing on the south-central part of the state. Nestled between the coastline and Chugach National Park, we can find Alaska's largest city named Anchorage. Also known as Anchortown, Anchorage offers many activities including biking, walking, and viewing wildlife. It is well known that outdoor enthusiasts can explore the Tony Knolls Coastal Trail, which provides 22 miles of jaw-dropping beauty. And for those of you who are less adventurous, then why not check out Alaska's Wildlife Conservation Center? The center allows many visitors to see native animals like bears, moose, and bison up close. Alternatively, if cultural history is more your thing, then the Anchorage Museum features exhibits on Alaskan history, art, and indigenous cultures. And the nearby Chugach State Park also offers breathtaking views of the Alaskan landscape. Heading into the city, Anchorage boasts numerous bars, pubs, and plenty of nightclubs. To add to that, it also has a thriving brewery scene, with establishments like Midnight Sun Brewing Company offering many local brews. It is oh so true. Anchorage certainly has something for everyone, whether that's mountainous hiking or simply dancing through the night. And at the beginning of the year 2012, it was in this city that you could find 18-year-old Samantha Tesla Koenig. Samantha was born on August 30th, 1993, to her mother Darlene and her father James Jr. Throughout her childhood, Samantha was known for her vibrant personality and wide range of interests, including a love for animals, music, photography, and outdoor activities. And moving into her teenagerhood, she attended West High School before moving on to Avail High School. Her friends often commented on her infectious charm, witty humor, and big-hearted nature. 3 things that proved that she was a well-loved figure among everyone she encountered. Of all the healthy relationships she had fostered, Samantha had an extremely close bond with her father. Quite honestly, the two were absolutely inseparable, and he would often say that he loved her like no other human. Not only was her early life marked by a deep affection from family and friends, but Samantha had a bright and promising future ahead of her too. In fact, Samantha was torn between dedicating her life to animals and becoming a vet, or alternatively, serving the United States in the Navy. Whatever her choice, she wanted to protect and serve, and that was evident in her personality too. However, she was still quite young and definitely not ready for either of those 2 jobs yet. And so instead, she worked at Subway and then House of Harley. That was until she took what is arguably the best and most well-respected job in the world. Of course, I'm talking about a barista. As the new coffee queen of her local coffee kiosk named Common Ground, she was introduced to people from all walks of life. Many good, but some also not so good. And sadly, you may already see where this is going. The date was February the 1st, 2012, and it was on this night that 18-year-old Samantha Koenig was doing the evening shift at the Common Grounds espresso coffee kiosk found on Tudor Road in Anchorage. It was a very typical evening. Of course, with it being Alaska in the middle of winter, it was already dark outside. It was during this time that Samantha was serving her last few customers while also preparing to finish for the night. At around 8 p.m, she could be seen tidying up the stand and then completing her tasks with her usual cheerful demeanor. You see, the coffee stand was a small, well-lit kiosk in a busy part of Anchorage. However, given the time of day and the season, this night was particularly quiet with only a few people passing by. And unbeknownst to Samantha, this routine evening would soon take a sudden and tragic turn. It was 8:30 p.m. when a man dressed in a dark hoodie and ski mask approached the coffee kiosk. And after ordering a coffee from Samantha, he briefly engaged in small talk with her, as seen here on this surveillance camera. After receiving the coffee, the dark figure lingered around the counter momentarily, before suddenly stepping into violent territory. It was in this moment that he abruptly pulled out a handgun, which he had kept concealed under his clothing, and with a menacing tone, he instructed Samantha to hand over all of the cash from the register and to follow his orders. Surveillance footage captures Samantha's shock and compliance as the man forced her to turn off all of the lights in the kiosk while he slipped through the window. And after Samantha was ordered to fall to her knees, he then restrained her with zip ties. While restrained, Samantha told the man that her father would be here any minute to pick her up. And so, after a slight pause, he then started to drag her out of the kiosk and towards his parked vehicle, that being a dark-coloured truck which had its license plates removed. With the assailant's arm wrapped around her shoulder and his other hand tightly gripping the gun that was pressed against her, Samantha had no option but to comply with his orders. She was hopeless, helpless, alone, and afraid. As they began to drive around town, the man explained to her that she had only been abducted for ransom, and if she were to follow his orders down to the finest point, she would ultimately be fine. But whether that would turn out to be true or not was an entirely different story. It is known that Samantha pleaded with this man. She tried to explain that her family did not have much money, but the man simply replied by demanding that she handed over her phone, which was key to his plan. It was at that moment that she realized that she no longer had it in her possession. She must have left it at the kiosk throughout all of the panic, which sure makes total sense to us, but it is also known that this severely frustrated her assailant. And so, they then returned to Common Grounds coffee kiosk at 8:56 p.m. to retrieve the mobile phone. The man then used it to message her boyfriend and her boss to tell them both that she had a difficult day and she needed to get away for the weekend. However, these messages felt incredibly out of character for Samantha, and eventually both of them knew that something unusual was happening. Amid the messaging, the man asked Samantha to hand over a bank card and bank details, but once again he was out of luck when she told him that her card was in her boyfriend's truck, which was located back at home. So, how do you think he decided to respond? He asked her to drive them to the home, where he then smashed the truck's window to gain access. As the man broke into the truck, Samantha's boyfriend came running out of the property to confront him. He then ran back inside to grab Samantha's father. But by the time the two came back outside, the assailant was long gone. Now, this was quite the bold move when you think about it, because not only had he kidnapped Samantha, but now he'd exposed himself to two of her most cherished people. And with such a disorganized and chaotic plan, he had no way of telling if this would go in his favor or terribly wrong instead. Well, sadly, it would be the former, and with all said and done, Samantha and her kidnapper disappeared into the night. I hate to say this, but over the following several hours, Samantha was subjected to hell. She was taken to a secluded shed in the back garden of a residential home, bound, and then subjected to physical and sexual abuse. Throughout the night, she was manipulated, forced to hand over her ATM card information, and then told that all of this would be all over if she followed his demands. Despite Samantha's compliance and several pleas for mercy, her fate had, unfortunately, already been decided. That's because the very next day, she was strangled to death, and after her death, her body was left on the cold floor of the shed. Unfortunately, Samantha's disappearance was not reported until the following day, hours after she had already met her tragic end. Despite the late start, the FBI swiftly descended upon Anchorage, driven by a desperate hope to find the missing 18-year-old. But despite their relentless efforts, nothing was found. All of their leads were frustratingly scarce, and sadly, that is when their hopes began to fade. That was until 3 weeks later, when, all of a sudden, on February the 24th, Samantha's boyfriend received a chilling message from her phone, directing him to a package left in a local park. When the Anchorage police arrived, they found an ominous photograph alongside a note. The photo showed a seemingly still alive and well Samantha, while the note itself demanded that $30,000 be deposited into her bank account. Of course, this was sure to devastate her parents, who, all in all, managed to gather $5,000, unaware of what was actually going on. The truth is that Samantha was already dead in this photo, and her lifeless body had merely been posed for the camera. Her eyelids were sewn open with fishing wire, and makeup was cruelly applied to her face to create the illusion that she was still alive. Propped crudely against a wall, she held an issue of the Anchorage Daily newspaper dated February the 17th. A sickening ruse meant to buy time and hope. Within days of this deposit, Samantha's debit card began to ping from various locations across America. First in Anchorage, then in Arizona, then New Mexico, before its final ping in Texas. And of course, this indicated to the FBI that, whoever her killer was, he was traveling east along Interstate 10. Surveillance cameras found near the ATM machines all revealed a man who was concealing his identity with a disguise. Which was smart, but not smart enough. And that's because he unknowingly left a vital clue behind. That being his white Ford Focus, which could be seen in all of the surveillance footage. So it's no surprise that this vehicle became a key lead for detectives. And after tracking the car down to a rental agency in Texas, they discovered that not only had it been rented by a man who fit the profile of the suspect, but his travel plans seemed to match the locations of all ATM withdrawals too. And soon enough, on March the 13th, a Texas state trooper in the quiet town of Shepherd finally spotted the white Ford Focus, which at the time he noticed was parked at a hotel nearby. And so, with patience and precision, the trooper watched and waited for the driver to emerge to see if this really could be their guy. As the car pulled onto the road, the officer tailed it discreetly, heart pounding in his chest while his eyes remained locked on the Ford Focus. But for now, he had no reason to pull the vehicle over. Now, thankfully, this car exceeded the speed limit rather quickly. And so, with that said, the officer now had a reason to stop him. After flashing to pull the driver over, both vehicles finally came to a stop. And after getting out of the vehicle and then walking up to the man behind the wheel, this man revealed himself as Israel Keyes. After a brief search inside the Ford Focus, he would find Samantha's bank card and mobile phone, therefore solidifying his involvement in her disappearance. He also found the disguise used while approaching the bank machines and what appeared to be a large sum of cash. Now, of course, this was a huge win for all detectives working on the case, but now they had Israel in custody, they had to find out who he was. So, let me ask and then answer the big question here. What do we know about Israel Keyes? Born on January the 7th, 1978, Israel grew up in Richmond, Utah. He was part of a large family that held conservative religious beliefs. And, believe it or not, he was the second of 10 children born to Heidi Hackinson and John Jeffrey Keyes. No surprise to this story, but Israel's family lived in isolation, disconnected from mainstream society. Initially devout Mormons, the Keyes family later began attending services at a church known as the Ark, which, surprise surprise, adhered to the white supremacist Christian identity ideology. Oh boy, here we go. Israel would later describe the Ark as fostering an Amish-like environment. Now, during their time attending the Ark, the Keyes family became friends with the neighbouring family of Chivi Kehoe, who would later be convicted for triple murder committed in 1996. It is noted that Israel's upbringing was largely defined by this isolation and the family's self-sufficient lifestyle. They would eventually move to a rural area near Colville in Washington, where they continued to live without electricity or any running water, of course, further alienating them from modern society. This environment fostered Israel's deep-seated antisocial tendencies, and he would later describe himself as feeling severely disconnected from people from a very young age. During his adolescence, he began to exhibit concerning signs that could evolve into future criminal behavior. That being, he developed an interest in weapons and was known to have killed animals for fun. There are other things too, which, quite honestly, are too gruesome to even mention in this video. You have probably heard this before already, but killing animals for fun is the hallmark sign of a clinical psychopath in the making. At the age of 14, Israel already stood at 6 feet and 2 inches, and so he was much bigger than most of his peers. Not only that, but he knew how to throw his weight around too. He would use this to his advantage and often broke into neighbors' houses, shot his neighbors with BB guns, and even stole and resold real firearms. Now, despite these warning signs, he would actually avoid getting into any serious trouble during his youth. Not only avoiding any punishment, but also keeping his darker inclinations hidden from those around him. His family's religious environment did very little to curb these tendencies, and eventually he would even distance himself from them and their beliefs. Moving into his adulthood, Israel was part of the army in 1998 and served for 3 long years. During this time, he was based in Fort Lewis, Fort Hood, and then in Egypt as part of the Sinai Peninsula Peacekeeping Force. Now, despite his seemingly successful military career, many of those who knew him during this time would later recall him to be socially isolated. Not only that, but he also exhibited very disturbing behavior. This included him expressing admiration towards Ted Bundy, and also admitting that he had no empathy for others. After being discharged from the army, Israel decided to work in construction instead, starting his own business in Alaska, where he lived with his girlfriend and their daughter. Now, you could say that outwardly, Israel appeared to be a normal, hard-working family man. However, beneath the surface, he was living a dark double life. A double life that detectives were only just about to find out. Interrogation began on March 13th, 2012, back in Anchorage, Alaska. As he sat in the interrogation room, he began to disclose many details surrounding the kidnapping. During this time, he also explained how he carefully planned the abduction. As the questioning continued, Israel provided a chilling account of what followed. It was noted that he murdered her shortly after the abduction, explaining the act with a very matter-of-fact tone. He then concealed her body in a shed on his property, left it there, and then proceeded to go on a planned family holiday. Disgustingly, her body lay hidden while Israel and his family traveled to New Orleans, where they then embarked on a cruise. Israel outlined his actions in a very calculated manner, noting how he carefully considered each and every detail in order to avoid detection. He further elaborated how, 2 weeks later, he then returned to the shed where Samantha's body lay. He meticulously prepared her body, applied makeup, and adjusted her appearance to make it seem as if she was still alive. Of course, he then took the photograph used in the ransom note. Towards the end of the interrogation, Israel finally disclosed the location of where they could find her body, explaining how he had dismembered her and then disposed of her in Matanuska Lake, where the cold waters would make it extraordinarily difficult to retrieve. The interrogation provided a clear and direct account of Israel's actions, but most importantly, it offered crucial information that led to the recovery of Samantha's body. The recovery was a painstaking process, one which required meticulous coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies. Matanuska Lake is a remote and icy body of water located north of Anchorage, Alaska, and so you can imagine that this operation was very remote. It was early April and the lake was still frozen over, of course complicating all recovery efforts for Samantha. Divers from the FBI's evidence response team, along with local law enforcement, were deployed to the scene. They had to break through the thick ice that covered the lake, using specialized equipment to create an opening large enough for divers to access the water. water. Once the ice was breached, the divers descended into the frigid dark waters of Matanuska Lake, guided by Israel's coordinates. The conditions were challenging to say the least, with visibility severely limited and the water temperature near freezing. After several tense hours of searching, the divers finally located Samantha's remains, which had been weighed down to prevent her from resurfacing. The body was carefully brought back to the surface and then transported to the state medical examiner's office. While here, they formally identified her and then conducted an autopsy. Her recovery marked the tragic conclusion and end of an intense and emotional investigation, providing her family and the community with the morbid closure that they had been seeking. Samantha Koenig was a cherished friend and beloved daughter whose presence brought warmth and joy to everyone who knew her. She had a close-knit circle of friends who admired her for her genuine kindness, infectious laughter, and the way she could make any situation brighter with her positive energy. She seemed to have a way of making people feel special and valued. Always ready to lend an ear or a shoulder to lean on, she created bonds that will forever be remembered and treasured by those who were fortunate enough to know her. Samantha's family was the cornerstone of her life, and she was deeply loved by them in return. She was a devoted daughter, a loving sister, and a source of pride and joy for her parents. Sadly, she was taken from this world by a cold and calculated killer. A killer who began to open up in his subsequent interrogations. And this is where we realize that this story is merely a chapter in Israel's books. Because it turns out that Samantha was not actually Israel's first victim. Oh no. In fact, from his best estimates, she was number 11. You see, we are only merely touching the surface of the morbid underbelly of Israel Keyes, a man whose dark and terrible history spans far beyond his barbaric actions against Samantha. And so, with so much to unpack here, let's just say that I'll be back with another video to reveal more secrets about his life, and of course, to pay remembrance to his many other victims. So, I think I'm going to leave this story here today, folks, but as you can tell, I'll be back with a follow-up video later next month, kind of like a prequel to this story. This was an incredibly sad case to cover, and what made her murder even worse was the absolute senselessness to all of it. However, as you'll see later on in part 2, it was the catalyst in taking down one of America's most prolific serial killers. As always, I'd love to know what you think about this story. Not only that, but what do you think about part 2 coming out next month? It's kind of a difficult one because I really do like covering cases that have barely had any coverage here on YouTube. But, as you know, Israel Keyes is quite the popular serial killer. One final message, but if you want to support me in the channel, or simply just support Nero, then check out my Patreon here. Alternatively, check out my social media here, most notably my Instagram. Anyway, that is it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, I really do appreciate you being here. And as always, I'll see you again very, very soon for another video. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.